Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Thinking Beyond Building Demand-Driven Supply Chains. My name is Valerie Sarajagopal, and as Senior Editor of CGT, I'll be your moderator for today. We'll get started in just a few moments, but while we wait for some more people to join us, I need to cover a few housekeeping items. First off, while the materials in this webcast have been reviewed by our editorial staff, the views of the speakers and their organizations are their own and do not necessarily reflect the opinions of CGT or its owner, Ensemble IQ. Now, as time allows, we try to make these webinars as interactive as possible, so please feel free to use the Q&A function to ask questions throughout the hour. You'll find that on the left side of your screen, down below the presenter headshots. We'll field as many questions as we can at the end of the formal presentation. If we don't have time to answer all of the questions, our speakers will follow up by email after the session concludes. You can also use the same Q&A section if you have any technical questions throughout, and you'll get a direct reply from our webinar producer. We also encourage you to provide any other feedback that you may have using this feature. And finally, if you want to review the webinar later on or share it with your colleagues, a replay will be available within about 2 hours of our conclusion today, and it will remain available for several months on consumergoods.com. A version of the slides from the webinar can also be downloaded from the Event Resources Center located in the same area. That does it for housekeeping, so let's get into the topic of discussion. With explosive growth in online commerce and new product introductions, demand signals have become highly fragmented. Positioning inventory at the right place has become ever more critical, and CGs are facing challenges in supplier identification or discovery for materials and untapped procurement savings opportunities. That is why I'm delighted to introduce our subject matter experts for today, who will discuss how to ultimately help improve the consumer experience and build a more resilient business while we emerge out of these turbulent times to become future ready. Our first speaker for today will be Suresh Bharadwaj, AVP Lead Product Manager for Trade Edge EdgeVerve, which is an Infosys company. Suresh has vast professional experience in product management, strategy, and business process consulting in the retail and CPG industries. He has led successive technology startups to significant value by creating globally recognized products and platforms in the areas of warehouse management, logistics, and sales execution, including as co-founder of Manhattan Associates, a global supply chain solutions company. He is currently focused on driving innovation within the consumer goods value chain. Joining Suresh will be Praveen Kombial. Praveen is the global product head of business applications at EdgeVerve, and his mandate is to leverage digital, AI, and other emerging technologies to build and launch platforms and products solving for specific business problems for industries globally. At EdgeVerve, Praveen leads a highly talented team of engineers and product managers in building an ecosystem of products addressing industries such as CPG and manufacturing focused on transforming their supply chains. And our third panelist will be David Bria, Manufacturing Business Leader for Microsoft. Dave and his team develop and deliver business transformation strategies to empower their customers to create value and sustainable competitive advantage. Dave brings over 30 years of experience in several industries, including consumer goods, and his specialty is leading enterprise transformation, operational turnaround, and performance improvement programs enabled by technology. Dave is a recognized expert in value management and a founding member of the Value Selling and Realization Council, a professional organization dedicated to helping companies maximize returns from their IT investments. He enjoys leading cross-disciplinary teams to develop shared visions, orchestrate execution plans, and deliver bottom-line results. Suresh, Praveen, and Dave, thank you all for joining us today. With that, I'd like to go ahead and hand things over to get started. So, Suresh, please go ahead. The floor is yours.
Thanks, Valerie. Good morning, everyone. Consumer goods companies have struggled with product out of stock, for ages. It's been very well documented that those out of stocks have ranged anywhere from 8 to 10%, and especially, in fact, it's even more so when you look at promotions, and during the time of promotions, they actually spike up even more. The fact that they spend anywhere between 18 to 20%, and in some markets even higher than that. It's kind of ironical that you spend money on promotions and your out of stock rates even go up. A lot of this could be attributed to your forecast accuracy. The question is, how can I get from where I am to maybe a 10% increase in forecast accuracy or even more most of the companies today struggle in the mid 50s or mid 60s to somewhere between and the lower 70% accuracy rates. So the forecast error is predominantly the key driver for these out of stocks. Having said that, and again in the emerging markets, we have a different kind of problem where the concept of retail is very different, where there are anywhere from 25 to 30 million outlets, and product coverage or distribution through a layer of distributors actually provides only a coverage of about 30 to 35% of those stores, which means you're less likely to have products in stock compared to the developing markets. Right. While these have all been historical challenges that consumer goods companies have faced, the food and beverages segment has some problems that are unique to that segment, which is primarily around tracking and tracing products in case there is a product contamination and the product has to be recalled. To know exactly where a product is at any point in time, whether it's in my warehouse or in my factory or with a distributor or in a retailer, and what product batch number sits where at any point in time to get that visibility real time has always been a challenge. So companies have tried to move away from what was historically a shipment-driven forecasting, which is identified to be one of the root causes for these forecast errors or lower forecast accuracies, to more of a demand-driven forecasting. It means you really need to collaborate with your external partners a lot more than what you have done so far. Over the last decade, the problems have only compounded. If you really look at the number of new products that are introduced in the market, it has gone up, by an order of magnitude or even more. And consequently, the out of stock rates have also gone up. But at the same time, the increase in e-commerce, and especially what we have seen in the last 1 year, where we have perhaps reached the kind of levels that were projected probably only for 2024 or 2025 or even later, we've reached those levels right now within a span of 1 year. What does all of this mean? It just means that your demand signals are now even more fragmented than ever before. Earlier, you had the stores open, you knew your points of aggregation of demand, which were those retail stores. But today, with most of us, sitting home and placing orders online, it becomes even more difficult to predict where the demand is going to come from, and therefore the ability to position inventory to where the demand is likely to come from becomes even harder. That means you can naturally and logically expect the forecast accuracies to go down even further. So what do we do about it, right? One of the problems can also be the fact that how companies have operated so far. While visibility has been a problem, collaborating with external partners to get those demand signals, to get those inventory positions, are all going to lead us to better analytical efforts and trying to make sure that we use the right tools, get the right data at the right time, at the right frequency and right granularity, and therefore drive forecast accuracy. One of the problems operationally is that most companies have operated historically on a territorial basis, which means if I, as a retailer, is running my business and I run out of stock on a certain product, I have a designated distributor or a designated company warehouse where I need to place an order. If that distributor, or if I'm working with a wholesaler or whoever it is, or a broker, then if that entity is out of stock, then they wait on their predecessor to make sure that they get their supplies, and in turn they can make their supplies to you. Which means this creates a kind of linear dependence in the entire value chain. The fact that the value chain is linear has been known, but the irony here is that while one retailer may be out of stock, it is quite possible that there is another retailer just across the street or maybe in the same zip code who is actually having excessive of the same product. And it's sad that retailer one doesn't know that there is someone else who actually has excessive product and could potentially, be a supplier to you. Similarly, it could be another distributor, but because he's out of your territory, you don't have visibility, nor do you have the authority to place an order on that distributor. So this is what has perpetuated some of, the out of stock situation that, most of us solutions companies and customers have been struggling to address. So is there anything we can do about it? If you really look at your value chain in the form of a network as opposed to a chain where the linearity is too pronounced, and really if I can connect everyone with everyone else in my value chain and really form a network where I suddenly am not only connected to my immediate predecessor or to my successor, but to my customer's customer, if you will. So if it is a company connected to a distributor, right, predominantly, and the distributor connected to the retailer, now the company could be connected to the retailer as well. And again, this depends on what your route to market strategy is. Nonetheless, to be able to connect to my customer's customer is a big deal. And it does a whole bunch of things, including disintermediating for information purposes primarily. In today's world, there's no need for me to depend on an intermediary to get me the information that I can get directly from my own customer. So that is number one. It actually brings visibility to all parties when we are connected in a many-to-many kind of a network where we know exactly what is available in what part of my network, and therefore my ability to do inventory balancing across the network becomes more comprehensive as opposed to addressing this as a point problem and therefore look for a point solution. So there are many use cases that can be enabled the moment you establish this connectivity. Primary to all of this is establishing a foundation of visibility to inventory across the entire network. And this, I think, is not just the key, but it is in everybody's interest, and it is not something that is likely to be looked upon as a competitive advantage or a disadvantage. And therefore, the motivation to come together, at least in terms of providing that visibility to inventory across the entire network, is expected to be higher. I'll just take a couple of examples, from what a network could deliver to you as use cases. Number one, in the last year, we have seen a significant disruption to supply lines. Our primary suppliers, and especially if you're in the apparel and footwear industry where your supply chains are long, and they also have very long lead times. And they extend all the way back, say, into Asia or outside the US. When your primary supplier was no longer able to supply because the factories were shut, people were not coming to work, or whatever may have been the reasons, how do I look for alternate suppliers? So having visibility to inventory across your network will help you, proactively and dynamically look for alternate sources of supply, which would not have been possible without such visibility. So driving supply resilience, and this has become a buzzword in the last 1 year, far overtaking efficiency as the keyword that has driven supply chain for the last 30 or 40 years. So today there is a great recognition among consumer goods companies that a little more cost is actually a good thing, because what good is it if I'm able to get my products at the lowest price possible, or the lowest cost possible, but I really don't have the product to begin with. So it's important to keep that in mind. So driving supply resilience by giving visibility to alternate sources of supply and be able to mitigate the risk of a supply risk or a supply risk is one of the prime use cases that you can drive once you are a participant in a network. The second thing that I can also talk about is order syndication. There are companies, which have always wanted to go direct to consumer. And today, with the consumer, taking up online like never before, it actually poses, two kinds of problems. Again, like I said, while inventory positioning has always been difficult, today taking consumer orders and then, matching that to where the inventory is one of the key benefits that a network is going to give you. The point is that forecast accuracies will try to predict where the demand is going to come from and therefore where you should position inventory. But in a situation like where we are today, it's actually more important to plug the gap of those situations where you don't have inventory, where the demand is coming from, by really taking the order to where the inventory is, right? And so, orchestrating the order to where the inventory is another use case. And you could do this on your own, or there are companies which have actually started, coming together as consortiums where they say, look, I don't want my consumers to have to go to multiple, websites to order products by manufacturer or by categories or brands. So they could further mitigate the risk of their efforts to go direct to consumer by coming together and creating, syndicated orders. It could be, multi-brand, multi-category, multi-manufacturer product catalogs that are available online, and therefore a consumer can place an order for a variety of products cutting across categories and brands. And behind the scenes, those orders would then get split and orchestrated to the appropriate suppliers for fulfillment. So there are many use cases that you can actually look at both on the buy side and on the sell side. But at this point, I'm going to want to transition over to our other panelists and start our discussion here. But this should give an idea on what the possibilities are when it comes to really transforming your value chains to your value network. Valerie?
Thanks, Suresh. At this time, I do want to bring in Praveen and Dave as well so we can dive a bit deeper into some of these trends that you talked about, the stats that you brought up. I think we're seeing that as well, covering this industry. There's so many unprecedented kind of things happening. So I definitely want to bring them in. But I think most importantly, like you said, is what can we do about it? So before we get into our discussion, I just want to encourage, again, the attendees to submit any questions, and we'll try and address those as well. Again, you can use that Q&A function on the left side of your screen down below the presenter headshots, and we'll capture all of those. So if we can't get to them today, we'll definitely follow up. Okay, so Suresh, while I have you, I'll come to you first. You talked about breaking the linearity in traditional supply chains. So can you expand a little bit more about what it means for organizations to be part of a multi-enterprise value network?
Sure. Yes, Valerie. I just want to clarify that we are not creating the networks, per se. Meaning these networks have always existed. Business networks have existed, from times immemorial. What we are trying to do here is, really, digitize those networks and bring a kind of visualization to the participants, to the users, in the companies who are part of these networks, that will suddenly, open up a whole lot of ideas. It's one thing to be actually in the weeds and be, operating those networks, but then when you really take a step up and really view the network in the way that, we are looking to digitize this, it actually opens up a whole, bunch of doors for you. For example, as part of a network, you have the ability to discover new prospects who could then become your customers, or maybe new prospective suppliers, because as much as you're happy with your existing partner ecosystem, there's always an opportunity for improvement. So new customer or new supplier discovery is definitely a benefit that you're going to start seeing simply by being on the network, right? And like I said earlier, disintermediation is key. When everything is moving to real time, there is really no need, for you to be dependent on your intermediaries if you're working in a market or if you have a route to market that goes through an intermediary, for you to depend on them for information. Today, you should be able to get that information. Information flow should be, real time. You still need your intermediaries for, physical goods supply and so on. But if you want to do product marketing and you want to reach your end customers and not really go through your channel partners to do that, then this is a way to doing that. Similarly, when you launch new products and you want to get a feedback on how the product is doing, or you want to run surveys with your end customers, you should be able to do that, through the network, again, without depending on your intermediaries. So these are just a few things that the value network is going to bring, which was not there in the value chain configuration.
Thanks, Suresh. Praveen, if you wouldn't mind, from your perspective, if I can come to you next, what does it mean to be part of the multi-enterprise value network?
Yeah, thanks, Valerie. So look, I mean, if you just take a step back from some of the points and examples that Suresh was articulating, they are about the ability to collaborate across the value chain, right? I think the ability of enterprises to extract value from supply chains within the enterprise is over and done with. And the next expression, the next value drivers are going to be about being able to, connect and collaborate across the ecosystem, across the various parties and partners on the supply chain. So enterprises can look forward to the ability to collaborate, automate, and even orchestrate over time processes across their ecosystems to be able to drive enhanced value. And, it's always interesting, Valerie, that typically consulting organizations and futurists have talked about this being kind of the end point of their maturity curves. But we can tell you that this transformation is underway today. And there's so many examples out there. I mean, there's a confectioner we're working with in Europe who's looking to bring all their warehouses and DCs and co-packers into one common ecosystem to try and create a state-of-the-art inventory hub. And that's just a start point before they get to direct to customer, direct to consumer. An OEM manufacturer in the US is trying to connect demand signals from their primary buyers to try and connect back into their suppliers' ecosystems and supplier, like tiered suppliers, to incentivize them to give them better visibility of inventory and stave off any risks and so on and so forth, right? So the kind of the ability to collaborate and orchestrate across various parties in a value chain, in a value network, is what enterprises can look forward to by being on a network. Valerie?
Yep, absolutely. Collaboration, I think, it's always nice to say you want to collaborate, but I think, with the events that have been going on, it's become really emphasized now. So that's a big one. So you both talked about what the network consists of, but being able to connect the parties across the network can be a challenge. So Dave, if I could bring you in for this next one, how can organizations take advantage of not just connecting to the cloud, but also getting the most value out of it?
Yeah, so thank you for including me in this discussion, Suresh, Praveen, and Alarice. I appreciate it. I think there's a couple of things that have changed over the past several years. I think we're coming up on 1 year of COVID really having impact on supply chains, but let's be honest, a lot of the ideas that we're going to talk about today have been around for multiple decades. I worked for a company called IQ Technologies back in the late 90s when we were fighting, we called it the APS wars, advanced planning and scheduling, and really that was about trying to deliver optimized demand and supply plans that were delivered based on data that we would extract from systems like ERP, TMS, WMS, type applications. I think that actually led to the birthplace of e-marketplaces, things like Transora that were going to solve CPFR, WWRE, and then there were other kind of industry-specific solutions like E2Open and Alemica that still survive today. I think there's really an opportunity for a rebirth around supply chain. I think supply chain's kind of cool again. And a lot of what Suresh and Praveen just talked about are opportunities for us to kind of rethink what is that operating model, right? How do we extend beyond the enterprise? How do we look at value chain integration? And fundamental to that is this concept of a hyperscale cloud application that goes well beyond compute and storage. It really becomes a platform where you can look at multi-party collaboration. You can look at different processes. Let's be honest, a lot of companies still operate with a single application stack and a single set of processes, even though if you believe Gartner, they're operating anywhere from 28 to 35 different supply chains across their enterprise. And so I think as we move forward and kind of talk about this multi-tiered network, it becomes a way that we can look at new data sources, we can start to stream it and make it more real time. And then I think the key from a Microsoft perspective in terms of where we've helped our customers unlock value is as we look at these digital control loops between planning, execution, and feedback. Typically, there are different technologies in most companies that control that orchestration of data. It leads to a lot of blind spots. It leads to a lot of work that happens in spreadsheets, and it leads to a lot of latency so that companies really can't operate at the speed that their customers expect. So as we look at trying to really close the loop from an employee, a product, supplier, and obviously a customer standpoint, that becomes really the biggest areas where we can help companies balance the continuous trade-off between cost, capital, and sales growth.
Right. Thanks, Dave. And, you bring up the data. So the next topic I want to cover is around visibility. And Suresh, I know you touched on a use case around visibility. So I want to ask, many organizations lack visibility beyond their tier one partners. So what are the implications of this lack of visibility? Praveen, if it's okay, I'd like to start with you first on this question. So if you wouldn't mind, again, what are the implications? And then maybe what advice would you offer for such an enterprise?
Sure. And I'm going to pick up some, circle back to what David was sharing earlier as well. But look, visibility beyond tier one partners in today's supply chain probably is akin to walking blind. Demand and supply is getting more and more fragmented. I mean, we've just done this to ourselves. One is, of course, consumer buying behavior is changing the demand fragmentation side. But we've also gone global. We've added many more supply points, and hence there's a fragmentation there as well, right? And there are implications in profitability, lost revenue and fill rates, higher inventory costs, promotion returns, etc. Right? There's a number of implications. Our steer can be kind of simplified into 3 points, like we try to articulate in the space. One is define your partners, right? Who are your tier one? Retailers, preferred suppliers. But then you start looking at many, many more partner data points, right? Warehouses, DCs, distributors, 3PLs, retailers, of course, tiered suppliers, contract manufacturers, marketing agencies, panel data. There's a whole world out there of partners who can add value to your supply chain, visibility and transformation, orchestration, etc. If once you define your partners, we believe that you should define visibility, right? And this is about granularity. This is about velocity of data. And the litmus question that we like to ask is that from how many of your partners today do you get near real-time access to critical supply chain information? Do you know what you sold yesterday, today from your partners? And our guess is that it's for a lot of organizations, it's now more than 20-25%. And we've been building demand networks for a decade, and our best in class across the globe is some 75% visibility. And of course, that's phenomenal because it's been an amazing journey. So that's really about be clear on what visibility that you seek. And lastly, define your data needs. What you want the data and what you want it for, what you're going to use it for. And again, there are different data sources. Modern retailers will give you data sets. You could download data on what their sales information, inventory positions have been. But this whole bewildering array of information there, you need to be clear about what you're looking for. You need to think about incentives for your partners to even share the data. Will your suppliers be open to sharing their inventory availability transparently and be worried about you looking for alternates, right? So this kind of define your partners, define visibility, and define key data needs at 3 key points that we think about as steered for enterprises. And now when you put this in context, look at the data that's getting generated. You're collecting terabytes of information at a per manufacturer, per CPG level across the globe today on a daily basis. And that brings to what David was talking about, the scalability, the ability to transform, and make it ready for generating insights and driving execution. So I know it's a bit of a long answer, but those are the few things that we talk about, Alvin, when we talk about this space of visibility.
All right, that's some good advice. Dave, if you don't mind, from your perspective, can I come to you with the same questions? What are the implications and what advice would you offer?
So the fragmentation is definitely a key driver. I think we're seeing that definitely in the B2C market, also in the B2B market, right? There's not very many deliveries that are hitting loading docks, right? They're going to doorsteps, and customers are becoming more demanding in terms of their expectations around both quality of service and timeliness of service. And so being able to respond to that has created this new world, this new word. I think not a lot of us used it a year ago, called resiliency. I think what is foundational is what was just discussed around visibility, but that's really the starting point. Visibility needs to go beyond the enterprise. It's not looking in your ERP system for order status, warehouse system around a pull in terms of what's getting loaded, or a TMS system in terms of what's in transit. It really becomes more of a continuous view. I think the next level is trying to understand patterns and trying to bring contextual kind of analytics to that so that you can become more real time and then predictive as things start to repeat. And I think the kind of moonshot for a lot of companies is, can you actually move to autonomous, where you're taking planners and execution practitioners out of the puzzle and letting some of these technologies, operate where there are bounds, but within control limits, it makes sense to be able to allow them to manage the day-to-day type of work, and then you can reallocate a lot of the human capital to solving more chronic problems, to being able to look at more persistent kind of continuous improvement initiatives. And then obviously where a lot of havoc gets wrecked on supply chains is around bringing in new suppliers, addressing new customers, launching new products, right? Those tend to be very manual exercises in most supply chains today.
Thanks, Dave. So we covered some challenges. We talked about, what the network could look like. So I want to next talk about the art of possible. So Suresh, what is possible once you have access to the real-time sales and inventory data at the store SKU level across tiers?
Sure. I think the first one is, really an easy one. If I know what is selling in a store at a SKU level on a daily basis, like Praveen said, if I know what sold in a store yesterday, today, at an SKU level, the immediate thing I would do is replenish. I mean, we've always talked about how good it would be if, magically, as soon as a unit of a product is taken off the shelf, another one automatically appears there. And that's really, this is as close to that as we can get. So replenishment becomes the first and the biggest, and the most immediate use case and benefit that we can deliver. And this has not been possible because for years, our customers have relied on syndicated data, which is typically at least a couple of weeks or maybe more away from when the actual event took place, when the sale took place. So So that latency is no longer acceptable. And a good example, of having this near real-time visibility is that one of our customers was able to limit their out of stock to less than 2 days, even in the height of the pandemic, say in New York State, where we were able to drive analytics that not just looked at sales and inventory from stores, but also looked at the number of COVID cases and correlated those two, and then said, look, this is where your demand is going to come from. And so that was a very good example of how a near real-time visibility was able to help keep those stockouts low. So daily replenishments would then become the norm. The other not so obvious benefit is really in how you're spending your marketing dollars, right? And I'm talking about digital marketing. And again, because we're talking about heightened e-commerce activity, and therefore digital marketing is where most of the money is going from traditional, media spend. And so now, and remember, a lot of this digital media spend is also programmatic. That means there's no one sitting and directing what should happen, but it's pretty much automated. Now, to that, provide the feed of where your products are selling. Now I'm talking about store level, SKU level sales. I could potentially aggregate that at a zip code level, right? I can say what stores exist in this zip code, and therefore, how my products are selling in the zip code. And a lot of this programmatic media actually can be controlled at a zip code level. That's the lowest level you can go, which means you could now potentially and automatically move your advertisement dollars from where you have high activity, but you're anyway getting a good return on investment, or take out from areas where you're not getting that good ROI and put it in areas where you're actually getting good ROI, right? So this is all, this is not theory. And at this point, we're actually working with customers on enabling something like this. And so those are two top use cases that I can think of, when it comes to real-time visibility to sales at a item store level.
Thanks, Suresh. I think the use cases are helpful, definitely. So when you're talking about the sales data, I think the kind of lowest hanging fruit is the out of stocks, right? So I want to talk about this scenario, especially since COVID really tested the resiliency in supply chain. So many manufacturers and brands observe frequent out of stocks. David, if I could ask you first, how do you manage such demand volatility in the case of any unforeseen event like this in the future?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, this is kind of a seminal event, so I'm not sure that conventional forecasting models are going to be able to predict something like this in the future. I think what we can do is start to recognize some of the variables and start to build them into some of the planning models that are possible now with some of these integrated cloud platforms. The ability to kind of move from 7 to 8 variables into literally hundreds of variables is now possible. I think we are working with a lot of the legacy providers that are starting to re-platform some of their existing solutions to be more cloud ready or cloud native. And then we're working with a lot of the digital startups that are really innovating around new capabilities and value propositions. I think the end goal is to avoid out of stocks, right? Not manage out of stocks. It's how do you actually recognize those shifts in demand, and then to the points that both Suresh and Praveen just provided is how do you also understand where there's readily available products, where there is capacity that may be available, and then how you close that latency between planning and execution so that you can meet that demand when it presents, and then do it in a way that's still profitable so you're not working overtime or expediting shipments. I think the last thing that I would highlight is that when we really talk about resiliency, it comes down to recognizing risk, providing transparency, and then also presenting mitigation strategies. So a lot of what we're doing is around running these type of simulations and then presenting planners and execution practitioners with next best available scenarios. Today, as we walk the workflow across supply chain organizations, there's still a lot of time. It can be up to 30 to 40% of a person's time just digging through data, trying to normalize that data, and then making sense of it so that they can make a decision. And that becomes something that in the new world of supply chain, we can take a lot of that work off the hands of people and really just present them with the facts so that they can make decisions and help balance that trade-off between cost, capital, and sales opportunity.
Right. Interesting. Praveen, can I bring you in for your perspective too? How can you manage such demand volatility?
Yeah, I think I echo David's thoughts about COVID kind of things have been events. There's only as much that you can do to manage, but I guess seeing the patterns emerging with a lot of variables and near real-time data is what is important. And I know we keep saying near real-time, and that's just because a lot of our learning on being on and creating networks has been that we have significantly different capability sets of partners and their platform and their own IT capabilities for us to be able to provide as near real-time as we get. So that's why we keep caveating that a bit. But look, there's many examples of how shifts being assessed on a near real-time basis. Suresh talked about one of our customers and their experience in New York. There's another one of our customers in Europe and the Middle East who was starting to sense a change in the demand related to some of their casual sports apparel. It became quite a rage when everything that you're doing is around home. And so their ability to sense that demand at a regional level and then redirect that to appropriate geographies was a very interesting use case and case study that we saw. We talked about it in one of our webinars recently. There's another one. We were running some campaigns around that time for some of our customers to saying, just tell us who your top 5, 10 retailers are where you're looking for, seeing what this demand shifts are looking like. And, we'll get to we'll pivot some data sets that are available on the network to see how we can give them better demand visibility. I guess it all comes down to how granular and how meaningful can you get a sense of your changing demand that will help you react faster. And then if that reaction is driven by your ability to automate and orchestrate with technology, instead of just having people address it, then you're probably going to be more scalable. That's the way we think about it. Always.
Thanks, Praveen. So I want to bring Dave here again, and Suresh kind of touched upon this a little bit, but we can't talk about COVID without talking about the shift in demand from physical stores to online. So Dave, how can technology help to address such disruption in consumer behavior?
Yeah, so I will kind of present our own experience from a Microsoft standpoint in terms of how COVID impacted our business. So we have two pretty complex and global supply chains. One is around our data centers. So think about building, all of the infrastructure that runs Azure Dynamics in our M365 cloud platforms. And then the second is our devices supply chain. So if you think about Xboxes, Surface devices, HoloLens, a lot of that was subcontracted to manufacturers in China. So when COVID presented, we actually saw it like January, February-ish of last year. And thankfully, we were already on a digital transformation journey where we had taken a lot of the OT data in those facilities, turned it into dashboards, and started to connect that upstream to our supply base. Over time, we were able to also build a online store And so this wasn't something that we advertised, but it actually allowed us to close all of our retail locations back in like the May timeframe of last year, and do that in a way where we didn't lay off a single retail employee. So it really became paramount for us to reskill them, help to not only look at our supply chain and the way that we went to market, but the way that we actually launched products. So we launched 4 products in spring of last year. We did it in a way where the product strategy was really focused more on not just transactional activity, but really looking at more of the lifetime of the customer experience. And so it really focused our leadership team to kind of rethink what our business was and how we were going to face off, against that market opportunity. The workforce transformation is not something that I would at all de-emphasize. I think that was fundamental to what we've been able to deliver. And then, as you know, if you were trying to get an Xbox, one of the new next generation consoles, we're still sold out, right? So I wouldn't say that by any means we were able to solve our supply chain challenges, but there is recognition, I think, finally, at very high levels that this is a national challenge. And as you look at some of the materials, components, food supplies that are in short supply and where we're capacity constrained, it really is forcing a rethinking around what does the network look like? How do we look at multiple sources of supply? And then how do we actually look at more of a regional and even local strategy to be able to kind of rebuild these economies within the U.S.?
Thanks, Dave. And it's amazing what we can accomplish when we're forced to, right? the pivoting is just amazing to me.
Yeah.
And what we're seeing across the board. Okay, Suresh, can I bring you in for the same question? How can tech help during such a disruption?
Yeah, sure. When things have gone online, it means consumers can place an order from anywhere, anytime. But I think we need to, take a step back and see how do we fulfill those orders. Can I take the same paradigm and flip it and say it can be fulfilled from anywhere by anyone, right? That's an extension of that paradigm of the ability to order anywhere, anytime. With a network configuration that we were talking about earlier, you don't have to be limited to taking orders from your consumers for items that you physically carry in your inventory. Right? It's unlikely that any site, any website, any online commerce site, any retailer, or for that matter, any brand manufacturer, any retailer would be carrying all products in stock at all points in time. It's extremely unlikely. Now look at leveraging the connections that you have made through the network, and therefore access to what I call virtual inventory, but it's really real inventory for those other parties. But then you have an access to that inventory, which means you have suddenly extended your fulfillment aisle to go beyond your physical facilities, your warehouses, your stores, to actually be able to leverage inventories from your parties on the network. And so now your ability to actually take orders, for items that are not necessarily in your control, goes up significantly, and therefore, you're able to fulfill consumer orders much better, and that's one use case that I can think of. The other use case I want to relate to is, many of these CG brand sites, when you go there, they're for information purpose only. As much as consumer goods companies want to know their consumers better, and they're all trying to make investments in D2C, yet they have not enabled commerce on their sites. And the reason is very simple. They're not able to fulfill individual consumer orders, especially when it comes in small pack sizes and smaller units and at certain order values. And therefore, when you want to buy something on a brand site, they typically redirect you to a retailer site or to another website where you can go and buy. But little do they know that when you end up on the retailer site, are you actually buying the product that you originally researched for, or did you end up buying a competing product because that product was on sale? And to me, that is not acceptable, right? So in today's world, you could actually capture the consumer information, also capture the consumer order, and really transfer the shopping cart to the retailer as opposed to transferring the consumer to the retailer. Because now you actually got information about the consumer that you've been so longing for, and you know what he's buying, he or she is buying. And then you still don't have to do the fulfillment because the shopping cart is transferred to the retailer, and then the retailer does the fulfillment. I know of instances where CG companies have actually started taking up consumer order deliveries as well. But even without going that far, you can still be in a situation where it's a win-win for both you and the retailer and the consumer, because with this and technology that will enable something like this is all founded on the network configuration that I talked about, and the ability to orchestrate an order capture from the point of capture to the point of fulfillment is where we are seeing the technology play a significant role.
Thanks, Suresh. I want to switch gears to another, I guess, you can call it a buzzword maybe, but we're talking about consumer behavior, and another big one is traceability. So while I have you, what are some of the effective ways that product traceability can be implemented within enterprises?
Yeah. See, all along, while we have talked about inventory visibility, there are two dimensions to it. One is, of course, for certain purposes, like analytics purposes, it's good enough for me to know what was the closing inventory yesterday. But when it comes to the real-time use cases like the one that I just referred to, where a consumer order needs to be fulfilled while the consumer is waiting on the site, you really need to have real-time access to that inventory, right? So your ability to connect with your partner systems in real time, maybe through APIs, so the recency of that inventory becomes extremely important. But there is a third element to this, and especially this is applicable in the product traceability use case, is where is the product at any point in time? It's not that the product is going to be static. There are things happening in terms of product in movement, in transit, from a factory to a warehouse, from a warehouse to a distributor, or to a co-packer, or wherever it may be going. So to be able to get that visibility to real-time inventory in transit is extremely important. Second, even within a warehouse, it is quite possible that the configuration of inventory keeps getting changed. Product that is sitting on a pallet is now being broken down because you got an order for a few cases on a pallet, and therefore the product is now has lost its pallet identity that is sitting in cases. You want to be able to know that. Some of these functions are actually provided, are part of a WMS system, but you need to be able to capture those events. It is not enough to say, I have, X number of cases or X tons of this product in my warehouse, but really need to know where, exactly it is sitting. Is it on pallet number 100 or 200, or it is broken down into cases or eaches or whatever? Is it in an active storage bin or in a reserve storage? So those are the kinds of things that you need to know. And this becomes extremely important because when a product is on recall, and especially if it is going to impact human health, then there are statutory requirements where you're required to know and be able to pull such product out of shelves within a matter of hours and not days. So for that purpose, real-time access to not just snapshot inventory, but also inventory movement becomes very important.
All right, thanks, Suresh. And Dave, can I bring you back in for your perspective? How can traceability be implemented?
Yeah, so I would highlight that there's kind of new boundaries that are possible that haven't been realistic in the past. One is Upstream traceability, we talk about kind of multi-echelon supply networks, being able to leverage distributed ledger type technologies to keep track of something. I think that the token word is provenance, right, where the exchange happens, has allowed both security and transparency, but also new kind of trade policies and conditions in terms of how companies are contracting with their upstream supply base. And then back to the changes that COVID have kind of forced on everybody, it's that last mile traceability. There's always been technologies available to look at container loads or truckloads, but now it's actually extended to parcel type deliveries, and being able to not just be focused on within the day or within the half day kind of time frames. We can actually look at real-time delivery capabilities. If you've obviously gotten a package from Amazon, UPS, or FedEx, you're seeing a lot of the innovation that's happening in that last mile. So again, I think where we're seeing value opportunity, either through cost reduction or unlocking new sources of opportunity to drive customer loyalty, it's at that intersection beyond traditional enterprise functions, and then extending the edge of the enterprise across the value chain. But those would be two areas that I would highlight in terms of traceability.
Great, thanks, Dave. So we're coming up on time here. So Suresh, just really quickly, I know you touched upon this a little, but you talked about the sell side of the value chain. Can you also just briefly talk about the possibilities on the buy side of the value chain, or I guess what are the real world characteristics of a network?
Yeah, I think I'm going to keep my response short, keeping the time in mind. I think David pretty much covered the buy side aspect of it, tracking multi-echelon suppliers, and therefore looking for alternate sources of supply or reducing supplier risks. So those are, definitely the benefits that you get. In terms of the network itself, the main characteristic that I want to highlight is that this is not going to be a system of record. You continue to keep, whatever systems you have, and that is going to be your system of record. This is an OTT primarily to orchestrate visibility and fulfillment. And that is really all that we are trying to do. Uberizing fulfillment is one of the objectives, if I can use that term. And therefore, the whole message here is try as much as you can to drive your forecast accuracies up. But there's always going to be a gap, and you bridge that gap by orchestrating orders to where the inventories are, and therefore you get full coverage. So that's what the network is trying to do.
And Praveen, just real quick, if I could ask you the same, what are the real world characteristics of a network? And you know what? In the interest of time, why don't I start with you as well, Praveen? Because I do like to, if you'd like to address that question, that's great. But I also like to just ask for any closing thoughts real quick.
Yeah, sure. Let me just combine. Sorry, it took me a minute to get off mute, but let me just combine both the two. Look, really from a last thoughts perspective, in summary, if you take a step back and look at it, we believe that 80% of data for supply chain decisions are outside the enterprise. And like I started by saying, the next wave of supply chain transformation has to be across enterprises and partners. There is a journey of, from building the ability to collaborate, whether it's on the demand side or on the supply side. The ability to collaborate on a network in an over-the-top digital kind of platform, to orchestrating processes intelligently, autonomously, like David was talking about. So there is no such thing as a perfect data or maturity point to start. Progressive organizations are going after it, one product line, market, region, country at a time. And the only way to do it is at scale is on the cloud. So, in summary, let's get started. That's what I would suggest. Alice?
Great, thanks, Praveen. Dave or Suresh, did you want to add anything real quick?
No, I think Praveen.
I would just suggest that we see a lot of companies that are focused on trying to take advanced technologies and use it as a way to optimize their current operation. I would challenge people to think about what their business needs to look like and support 3 to 4 years out, and really think about that next generation operating model. Too often, I think the strategy is impaired based on the existing application set and the way that the organization is structured. And there is actually breakthrough potential to be able to deliver step change improvement on traditional supply chain metrics while improving customer experience and loyalty. And so that's something that we've actually had to shift the way that we engage with a lot of our strategic customers to get them to kind of think beyond optimization and really think about what is possible moving forward.
Great. And Suresh, any closing thoughts?
We've talked for long about, autonomous supply chains, and this is the other buzzword. But I think, using the network as a first step towards that, I think he's actually moving in the right direction towards, getting closer to that vision. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because this is bringing supply side, sell side, buy side all together in a 360-degree network.
Perfect. I think that's a great way to end. I'm afraid that's all the time we have for today. But before we go, I'd like to leave our, I'd like to thank Suresh, Praveen, and Dave for giving us their subject matter expertise today. I'd also like to thank EdgeVerve for sponsoring today's webinar. And finally, to our attendees for devoting some of their very valuable time to be with us today as well. We hope you found it worthwhile. Again, the webinar recording will be available on demand shortly on consumergoods.com. So thank you all again, everyone, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you.